Kindergartners, it's Mrs. Seals back for our next science lab. So the past couple weeks we've been talking about ways we can describe objects. We've talked about shape, we've talked about big and small, we've talked about heavy and light, and we have talked about how things feel, which remember is called texture. So today we're going to be talking about how we can change things by heating them up or cooling them off, mostly heating them up, okay? So let's get started. It says changes caused by heating, and there's your target. I can observe, record, and discuss how materials can be changed by heating. How can we change objects by adding heat? Some objects change when heat is added. This is called melting. Objects lose their shape and get softer. They might spread out. They might get bigger. Okay, think about an ice cube. When it warms up and melts, it goes from being a square or rectangle or a cube to kind of like a puddle of water, right? Can you think of some things that can melt? Here are some things I thought of that can melt. Ice cubes, chocolate, butter, cheese, crayons, candles, and marshmallows. All of these things can melt. Right now, all of these objects could be described as being solid. That means they have their own shape. However, when I add heat to them, they start to lose their shape and they can turn from a solid into what we call a liquid. They lose their shape, they get softer, they get squishier, they kind of spread out. And if they keep getting heated up and heated up, they will eventually be almost like water, very watery. An ice cube will turn into water. It will almost be like a big puddle, okay? So let's do an experiment. Today we are going to look at 3 objects to see which one melts the fastest. What we're going to be melting is butter, chocolate chips, and ice. So before we start, I want you to make a hypothesis, which you'll remember is a prediction about what you think is going to happen. So I want to know, which one of those 3 things do you think is going to melt the fastest? The butter, the chocolate chips, or the ice? And why do you think it will melt the fastest? So remember, whenever scientists make a prediction about what's going to happen in an experiment, it's not just a random guess. It's called an educated guess, where they use their background knowledge. They use things they've seen before, things they've done before, maybe other experiments that they've seen, and they use that to make their prediction. So I want to know, which one do you think will melt the fastest and why? Which one do you think will melt the slowest and why? All right, so here's our experiment today. If you are at home doing this, remember, science experiments are not something that we ever want to do by ourselves. If this is something that you would like to do, please make sure you have permission from a parent, mom, dad, whatever grown-up takes care of you. And please make sure you have their supervision, which means they are watching you as you do this, okay? This experiment isn't super dangerous, but it does involve hot water, which can burn you, and I don't want anyone getting hurt, okay? So in order to melt something, we have to add heat to it. So we need a heat source, which today is going to be hot water, which I have in here. I just heated this up. And in a minute, when we're ready to start, I'm going to pour it into this bowl. Okay, so I told you the 3 objects we're melting today are ice, chocolate chips, and butter. So I have those right here. Before we melt them, I want us to look at them and talk about what they look like now before heat is added to them. Okay, so right here, here's our butter in this baggie. I want you to notice right now that this butter has its own shape. Right now it's a square. And as I turn the bag, the butter doesn't change its shape, does it? It still is a square. That's how I know it's a solid, because it has its own shape, and its shape doesn't change when I move it. All right, there's our butter. Here are our chocolate chips. So right now, notice right now I have 3 chocolate chips. On the bottom, they're a flat circle. on the top that looks like they're kind of wearing a hat. They're a little triangle. And right now, since there are 3 of them and they are solid, they have their own shape, they're very easy to count. I can easily see that I have 1, 2, 3 chocolate chips because they have their own shape. They're a solid, okay? So keep this in mind so we can compare this to how these items are going to look after we melt them. And then here's my ice cube. Again, it's a solid, it's a square, it has its own shape. Some of it has already started to melt. I see some water right there, but most of it is still in a cube. All right, so what's gonna happen is, in just a second, I am going to pour some water in here, some hot water. And, ooh, look, you can tell it's really hot. That's another change that happens from heat. When liquids are heated up, they turn into a gas and they evaporate. And that's all that steam or water vapor that you see coming up right now. That's the gas form of water, okay? So I have my heat source. I have my objects. I'm going to place them in this bowl for maybe about a minute or 2, and then afterwards we'll take them out to see the changes that have happened. Remember, we're trying to see which one is going to melt the fastest. So I'm putting them in. I'm kind of just using the stick to make sure they stay underwater. I'm observing the changes that are happening. I'm not touching the water. The water is very hot. I don't want to get hurt. Remember, safety is very important in science. I already see some things happening. I'm going to let it go for maybe another 30 seconds or a minute, and then we will take them out and look and talk about how these items have changed when I added heat to them. Should have brought some paper towels over. I always forget. Oh, here's some right here. Hold on. All right. Okay, maybe about 10 more seconds. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to take these objects out, set them on the paper towel so we can then discuss them. All right, so we are comparing the changes that happen when we add heat to objects. So let's start with our butter. How about our butter? Oh my goodness. Do you remember how our butter looked before? Do you remember it was a square? It had its own shape. And when I turned the bag, it didn't move and change shape. Look at our butter now. Can you see that? Is our butter still a square? No way. So we could say that it has lost its shape. It no longer has its own shape because look how it moves and changes as I turn this bag. So it's changing its shape as its container changes, as it moves. If I were to open this bag and pour it out, butter would spill out everywhere. Whoa, this butter is all the way melted. It melted super fast, didn't it? Goodness gracious. All right, let's look at our, are you ready to see our chocolate chips? Do you remember before we melted them, we had 3 separate chocolate chips and I could easily see the 3 separate chocolate chips and count them? Are you ready? You're not gonna believe this. You're not gonna believe what they look like now. Oh my goodness, look at my chocolate chips now. Can you see 3 separate chocolate chips? I cannot, because these chocolate chips have lost their shape and they have squished and they are soft and they have completely melted together. I don't even know how many chocolate chips this is. I mean, I know it's 3 because I saw 3 before, but if I were to just see this without have seen it before, I would have no idea. This could be 2 chocolate chips. This could be 5 chocolate chips. I don't know because they don't have their own shape anymore. They have melted. Now, the only thing about the chocolate chips is they haven't melted all the way. Like, it's not like chocolate syrup. You know how chocolate syrup you put on your ice cream is like a full liquid? It's almost like watery. This isn't quite there yet. If we continued melting it longer or hotter, eventually maybe it would get to that point where it was, more liquidy. But it definitely has lost its shape. It's definitely gotten softer. I definitely cannot tell how many chocolate chips I have anymore. Do you agree with that? All right, and then the last one, I don't know if you're ready to see our ice cube. Are you ready to see our ice cube? Do you remember before that our ice cube was a square or a rectangle? Look at our ice cube now. All I have now is a bag of water. Can you believe that? There's no more ice cube. It's just a bag full of water. Isn't that silly, Miss Seals, to just be playing with a bag full of water? And guess what I noticed? Which if you do this experiment at home with your mom or dad or whatever grown-up lives with you, you will notice that the ice melted super fast. Almost as soon as I put it in the water, it started melting. But guess what? It even started melting before that. As soon as I took the ice out of the freezer, it already started melting because ice has to be kept at a temperature that we call the freezing point, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. And after it gets warmer than that, it already starts to melt. So as soon as I took it out of the freezer, you saw before I even put it in the hot water, it had already started melting and turning into water. That's how fast it happened. Wow, my objects really were changed by the heat. So we're putting them in order. The thing that melted first and the fastest and the most was the ice. I just have a bag full of water now. So ice was number 1. Number 2 was our butter. The butter did melt all the way like the ice did, but the butter took a little bit longer. It didn't melt as quickly as the ice. So ice was first, then our butter, and then we have our chocolate chips that definitely changed. They lost their shape, they got softer, they got squishier, they spread out, but they're not completely liquid like the ice and the butter. Isn't that cool? Isn't that amazing how much things change just by adding a little bit of heat to them? It wasn't even super hot. It's just warm water. Wow, science is really cool. If this is an experiment that you do at home with your parents and they say it's okay, I would love it if they would take a picture and email it to me. Again, Science Lab is just optional. It's not required. It's not part of your grade. It's just something extra that you can do for fun to practice learning these science concepts. I hope that you guys had fun, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.